Welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report, powered by Caliber Mind. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Joy Martinez. Joy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Camela. So excited to be here. So I'm Senior Director of Marketing Operations at CS2 Marketing. We're a marketing ops agency, kind of based all over. We have people in every time zone now here in the US. So I joined CS2 about 6 weeks ago. But I come from a long history of marketing ops, demand gen, and also both in-house roles, consulting, and independent consulting experience. So it's a little bit about my background.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as we were talking, it's interesting. You were talking about your passion for finding people's strengths. And I love that because I think a lot of us tend to focus on our weaknesses and try to improve that as opposed to playing up to our strengths. So if you could give us a little bit about how you found that passion.
Yeah, so it all kind of started back in like 2008, 2009, 10. I was working for a company that was, let's just say, a little toxic work environment. And as I was like kind of working there and thinking, there's got to be better enjoyment and just better cultures out there and things like that. And I would kind of escape on my lunch break to a local bookstore and just eat lunch and dive into books and stuff. And I was always drawn to strengths-based, development, books on company culture and employee engagement and things like that. And so, and then while I worked there, I also was getting my master's in business at the time. So I was taking classes too on culture and organizational behavior and development. And so it was kind of a unique experience of seeing what I knew, could be out there, but then it kind of experiencing the opposite, where I worked. But that kind of led me at the very start of my strengths journey. But then eventually I decided I was done commuting over an hour to work and wanted to work remote. So I started my remote working journey about 9 years ago. And after that role, when I got that role, I was interested in consulting and, fell in love with Marketo and marketing operations. And it was during that time that I decided to go independent and just to consult on my own. And when I started that, I was like, wow, I can work half the amount of hours that I was working before, replaced my income that I was working full time. And then I still had half the amount, 20 hours a week to still do something else. And so I could have, continued to get more and more consulting clients, but my strengths passion just was so loud at the time that I decided to do strengths-based coaching for online entrepreneurs, online coaches, business coaches, things like that. So I actually got asked to speak at Grand Valley State University, which is a local university here in Michigan, at their leadership conference. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to use this as an excuse to kind of kick off my strengths business and do it on strengths. And so that's what I spoke on. And I left the company I was working at. They were actually my first client, and they were going through a merger at the time. And so I kind of went off in this independent, self-employed world of half my time doing Marketo consulting and half my time doing strengths-based coaching. And so I could kind of have the best of both worlds of, my passion for marketing ops and Marketo, and then my passion for strengths. And I did that for over about a year and a half before I joined an agency to consult at an agency. But that's kind of the start of my strengths journey, and I've just kind of carried it on through since. But
oh, that's great. It's so nice to hear somebody else have a really positive experience with freelancing. I loved it. It was fantastic. It's funny how company culture is something you can't really, it's hard to define and point at and say, that's a good culture versus that's a bad culture. But once you're in a bad culture, everyone feels it. It impacts everything. So going back to strengths and weaknesses, I would love to hear just a little bit about why strengths versus weaknesses? Why not focus on the weaknesses? Just the philosophy behind that.
Yeah. So, I mean, strengths-based development was really kind of coined by Jim Clifton. From he's part of the Clifton Strengths with Gallup, and he's kind of known as like the grandfather of strengths, if you will. And there's been studies done, tons of research done by Gallup and other organizations that prove that developing what you are already naturally and innately good at, and putting investment of time and resources and education in those areas are going to make you more productive, higher performing, happier, all of the above, compared to fixing weaknesses. And so it's not to say that you're just going to completely ignore your weaknesses. Like, you still need to be knowledgeable about what your weaknesses are and how you're going to find support for those. But you're definitely not going to spend, and it's really not recommended to spend time fixing them. So yeah, I just love that, philosophy, I guess, and found it to just ring true for myself.
Yeah, I feel like our culture really emphasizes identifying weaknesses and just beating ourselves up over them. Like the internal, I should do this differently. I shouldn't do this. We should ourselves, as a good friend of mine says, and I just love that saying. But yeah, the returns on focusing on the strengths are just far higher. I love that you're pointing that out. So people listening, and let's just face reality. It's really hard for us to identify our own strengths and weaknesses. What kind of tools can they use to help them identify, particularly their strengths?
Yeah, and it's so true. It's really hard to see, our own strengths. Sometimes it's very easy to look at somebody else and say, "Oh my gosh, I wish I, was good at that or could do that." So there's lots of different tools. There's, things that cost money, things that are free, lots of different ways. So I personally coached with and love the Clifton Strengths through Gallup. It's like $30 or 50 if you want your full 34 rank and can see, but if you just want your top 5 to see what your like top most natural talents are, I think it's like $30. Also like Myers-Briggs, I know a lot of companies, like I can't tell you how many times I've done the disc profile. 16personalities.com is a nice site, and you can get a lot for free on there. And that kind of mimics Myers-Briggs in a lot of ways, but you do get a lot of information on that website. There's the Enneagram, Colby, you name it. There's a lot of assessments out there. The reason I like Clifton Strengths is because it's really looking at the natural way that you think, feel, and behave. So it's like, if you think about how you work and what you bring to the table in work, in life, your interactions with others. So for me, that one really resonates. But you can even just do exercises like just, kind of thinking on your own. Like, one thing I would always recommend to clients was to do the peaks and pits exercise. I don't know if you were younger and your parents ever like sat at the kitchen table and was like, what was your peak of the day? What was your pit of the day? Or, if you think about like your gains and drains, what things like, gave you energy and, added to your battery and what things depleted it. So just thinking through those things usually help you identify kind of like the things that really light you up. And so for example, like I'll even, suggest kind of getting at the core things. So even if you're thinking like, let's talk like marketing ops, because that's what I'm in, like, okay, list imports. It's not the list import itself that to me finds like is draining. It's like what's behind the list import. Well, I don't really like just like boring monotony, and like that feels like that to me. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, really thinking of like what brings you energy, what takes away your energy, can help you identify it a lot. And then asking others too is helpful. Like just, asking others like, hey, what do you see in me that you see as a, just a natural talent in myself and, what I'm good at and things like that. Because you can be, like I said, others can usually see it in you first. But you can also be really like you can be really good at something and it can still drain you. So those are usually like learned behaviors or like where you're kind of forcing yourself to like step up to the plate and not your natural zone. But then like, like I could give a speech to 100 people, or 1,000 people, and I could probably go on stage and do that. But I would want to prep ahead of time, and there'd be like the natural way that I would want to prepare for that. And then afterwards, I'd be pretty drained, right? Like that's not my natural go-to. And so, you got to really think about not just what you're good at, but like, does it bring you energy and joy and excitement when you're doing it? And how do you feel after you're doing it?
Wow, you're talking about the thought process I went through right before my career change. I love it. So,
Yeah, it's good also if you're having a midlife crisis or you're getting ready to have a career change or trying to really figure out like what do I want to do with my life.
it's so true. I think I had listened to Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which is I recommend it to everybody. But during one of the last chapters, he talks through really evaluating what you don't like, why you don't like it, and what the alternatives may be. And it forced me to do this whole like, I really enjoy writing. I'm kind of getting burned out on the operational aspect. I love technology. What about writing about technology? And it was just like this whole light bulb moment. So I really recommend
Yeah, light bulb.
anything. Yeah. Anything that brings mindfulness to the table and just being aware of what brings you joy. I love that. And it's so fitting. Okay, so what do you think is some of the psychology and social norms that go into us having a hard time spotting our strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, so I mean, one, like your strength is usually a natural talent that's very just innate to who you are. A lot of people say, oh, you're born with it. Like, I mean, they can change slightly over time, but I've taken the Strengths Finder a million times, or the Clifton Strengths as now it's called. I am the same no matter what personality assessment, talent assessment, strengths assessment you give me. Like, I am the same. And because those things are so innately natural to us, they sometimes come very easy to us. And so because they're easy, we don't really like give them credit for what they are. Like if you think about like, how easy it would be for somebody with a strength in communication, or like on the Clifton Strengths, there's one called woo, which means winning others over. And like, those are the types of people that can just step in the room. Like the light shines on them, like everybody's just drawn to those types of people, and they have no problem having, conversations and stuff like that with complete strangers. And because that's so innately natural to them, like they may not even realize that that's a talent of their own, until somebody that doesn't have it, that's not innately natural, points it out. And it's like, oh, well, I'm not that way. But then it also kind of like makes you, like you start to kind of like point fingers and go, oh, I wish I had that strength, or like, I wish I was good at that. Like I've had some clients before that, they'll take the Clifton Strengths and then they get their top 5 or whatever. And then they're like, man, like I was really hoping I'd have that, or I'd have this, or like, they're like envy over the other talents that they don't have. And so like one thing that I really focus on is like, first you have to discover and know what your strengths are, understand what they mean, and then you can truly appreciate them. Because if you don't know A, what they are, or like B, what they really mean, it's really hard to really appreciate them. And if you don't have appreciation for what makes you so unique and what you bring to the table, it's really hard to like fully leverage them like in your business and in your life and in your career. So yeah, like you definitely need those steps in order to kind of make your strength shine, if you will. There is kind of like a nuance with strengths that there's like a strength zone, like where you like are leveraging them so well, like everything is in tune, like if you think of tuning a radio and you finally get to that station, like an old radio, I'm probably showing my age, like an old radio where you're tuning the station and it gets clear, right? And it gets clear. Like that's what it's like. But like there's some fuzzy zones where like you are underdeveloped with your talents. Like you just don't invest enough time using them. You don't know what they are. And so like you're using them a little like haphazard, if you will. There's also like a second tier to that where it's like even worse, where it's kind of known as like a frozen talent or a frozen strength, like where there's like gender based norms and cultural norms and things that influence our strengths. And so, like, for a female on Clifton Strengths, if they have like command in their top five, or competition or self assurance, like, they may think that they need to kind of step down a little bit and be smaller and not like, you know what I mean? And then for the opposite, like for males, like if they have positivity or empathy, good Lord, if they have empathy, right? Like in their top five, like, does that mean that they're weak? And so there's all these like things that go into it, that influence how our strengths show up in ourselves, because oftentimes like we will kind of cater to the situation, which is not what you want to do, but like it just naturally people do that, especially if they aren't very aware of their strengths and appreciate their own and have confidence with them. They'll let those gender and cultural norms kind of like seep into their strengths and how they come to fruition. And then the opposite side of that is kind of like overusing a strength. Like I have achiever in my top five. Of course, like I also have maximizer, which wants to do really excellent work. And so like, if I'm overusing it, I can burn out. I feel exhausted. Like I'm kind of a workhorse, and then that's when it's like in a place where it's not very good. And there are some talents that like intensify other talents. So maximizer and focus on the Clifton Strengths, if you're very good at, you were really wanting excellent work, or you're very good at like just focusing and honing in on things, those two talents amplify any other talent that you have. So like if you have those two, like just know that they can amplify things. Learner and input often go together and they can intensify each other. So input is like, wanting to know all the things, having the information, collecting information, knowing things. Like you're always usually like, I always say those people are like the ones that have 100 tabs open on Chrome, right? Because they're just busy researching and learning and studying and collecting information, and like they're very intensified. I have both in my top 10, so they can intensify each other. So like those places of intensity with talents can get interesting, and then just like overusing them, or like leaning too far into one and not letting your other talents around them even support each other. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but that's kind of like
That's great.
how I see like why it's so easy to like see what you don't have, because if you're in those states of letting other influences kind of take over and you're underdeveloped or you're overusing, they look sometimes like weaknesses. You might be like, man, like I'm always burned out, I'm whatever. And it's like, well, yes, achiever can be a really good thing. Like that's really positive, but you're overusing it. So it feels negative. And so that's like one thing I would always help my clients understand is like how to find that balance, like find that right tune on the radio so that it's just very clear and not fuzzy.
For sure. And this is such a great segue into a trend I've seen, and I'm going to generalize a bit because I see this happening with women a little bit more than men. It's not that men don't do it, but not as frequent. Turning down a promotion. So I think there's a lot of things that feed into that, and I've been guilty of it myself. I keep thinking it's more responsibility than I want, all these different things, and then I end up doing the job anyway without the title. So what do you think feeds into that, and how can we avoid that scenario?
Yeah. Oh, man, I've probably seen this way too much. I mean, whether it comes to promotions or just like, ooh, like second guessing if you should go after something, a different type of role. Heaven forbid if you want to like get into a different route than like what your career has been. You're right in that females, I've seen it too, that females tend to do it way more than men. And I think like The first thing is like don't underestimate the appreciation of your own strengths and talents. Like you've really got to like appreciate them and be mindful about them um, to gain confidence around it. And once you have that confidence, though, like it's a lot easier to like I got really good at knowing what mine were, what they meant. Like I will own it, and I know what I'm really good at, and I know what I'm not as good at, or what's not as natural to me. And I would own that, in interviews and stuff. And it's almost like, when people talk about practicing, like your interview questions or like even what to put on your resume to stand out from everybody else. I always include my strengths and I always talk about them, and I'll always twist a question around to go back to speaking about them, um, because I know that's what I'm really good at. And if you're focusing on and confidently speaking to what your talents and strengths are, the other person is going to perceive and feel that as well. And so, yeah, I think kind of, I call it personal power, self actualization, mindfulness, whatever you want to think about it. You really need that in order to see your strengths, have competence, confidence, like, and it all goes together in order to really advocate for yourself, really.
I love it. So I know I'm going to be checking out the Clifton Strengths after this. We'll put links to resources in the show notes. Joy, thank you so much for being on. Where can people find you online to network?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best place to find me is LinkedIn. I'll give you my username. It's linkedin.com/in/Joy Martinez MBA. And I look forward to connecting with everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again. And for those of you watching or listening or watching to the show, please like, follow, subscribe, and tell 2 friends. It really does make a difference. And for those of you looking for more great content like this, check out calibermind.com.